seemed to laugh when I announced it was standard time. I understand some of you were here an hour ago. I also got up early and didn't change my clock. I'm going to talk about, in the homily, sacrificial love. And over my 50 years as a priest, 35 of them I've mentioned were preparing couples for marriage through the program Engaged Encounter. And so I have heard over the course of 35 of my 50 years many stories of married couples who are talking to people about to prepare for marriage about the importance of sacrificial love. And there was this one couple, they were having financial difficulties. And I guess one of the things that married couples fight over most is, I won't mention the other two because they're a little bit difficult to talk about from the pulpit, but finances you can talk about from the pulpit. And this one couple was having particular difficulties, and they agreed that they wouldn't spend any large sums of money without consulting the other. So it's near Thanksgiving time, and they've been invited out, and in comes the wife with this, she's all dressed up in this incredible, beautiful outfit. It had to cost hundreds of dollars, if not much more, and she obviously hadn't asked him about this large purchase, so he said to her, "Honey, you know how much I love you. Whatever possessed you to buy this without asking me?" And she said, "Well, you know, I was tempted and it looked so nice and I thought I'd please you, and the devil made me do it." And he said, "Well, you should have said, 'Get behind me, devil.'" She said, "I did," and he said, "It looked pretty good from back here, too." All right, now for the serious part of the homily. Today we hear in Mark's gospel, Jesus sits down across from the treasury. Now that tells us where he is in the temple. He's in the court of women. He's already upset things in the outer court when he called it a marketplace. And here he's in the women's court. And the thing that's interesting in this women's court is it's the place where the treasury is. Women couldn't go any farther than the women's court, but they could come in and they could put their money in what were called the trumpets. There were 13 containers that were shaped like trumpets, and they got their name, I imagine, from the shape of the vessel, and they were in this court of women, and each of them had a special purpose. You put money in whatever was your favorite trumpet to help for the upkeep of the temple and for what it would cost to do sacrifices. And while women couldn't go beyond this court into the holier space, they certainly were welcome to drop in their contributions. And so Jesus is observing what's going on. And many people, obviously, were throwing in considerable contributions. And when the rich dropped in their coins, because most of the currency, I guess they didn't have paper money like we have, or credit cards, they were dropping in coins, and the rich were throwing in, obviously, large sums, and the trumpets would ring out loudly with their gifts. And Jesus fixes his attention on what's happening when this poor widow comes up and drops in her coins. And the word that Mark uses to describe this widow, we translate it into English poor, it implies that she's bowed down in her need. She's so oppressed and poor that she's bent over. And we talk about, in English, the 2 coins she drops in. The original language is she dropped into lepta, L-E-P-T-A. And it's the smallest and the thinnest coin that could possibly be in circulation. And this lepta were the typical coins that people would give to beggars, like this woman who was in need on the street. And Jesus wants his disciples to understand what they've witnessed. So that's the context in which today's gospel is coming to us. And as I said, he previously had driven the merchants out of the outer course because it had become what he considered a market instead of a place to encounter God. So here, the point is being made, this woman, this widow, this poor bent-over woman is encountering God in her way. And how is she different from all these folks with their surplus dropping in, making all these wonderful noises that are helping to fund the temple, its sacrifices, and all the things that go on in the temple? How is this? What is the lesson that the disciples are supposed to learn from all this? And in this inner court, he is observing what he calls the sacrificial love of this poor woman. And it is Mark's kind of way of introducing what will ultimately be the sacrificial love of Jesus on the cross. But in today's passage, he's focusing on getting the disciples, the followers of Christ, to think about what is required, what is sacrificial love. And as our gospel concludes, we're left kind of hanging. Had it continued, we would have found that as the disciples left the temple, instead of focusing in on the lesson Jesus had taught or was trying to reveal to them, what did they talk about? How beautiful the renovated temple was. They missed the teaching about what sacrificial love was. And perhaps the question is, do we miss the teaching of Jesus on sacrificial love? So Jesus will say to them in a subsequent passage, all of this beautiful temple will be destroyed. All of this that you admire so much will be gone. And what then? So the question is, have we thought about what sacrificial love requires of us? I started with what I think was a humorous story, which was probably true in some couples' lives in different ways, because couples know firsthand and parents, what sacrificial love is. Our culture loves the idea of love, but they rarely love the demands that sacrificial love requires. And sacrificial love puts aside a me-first lifestyle and attitude. That's really what's there. And that's really what that woman was doing. Love without sacrifice is selfish. Love without sacrifice is selfish. It's conditional love. I don't know about your experience with love, but my experience is that love can oftentimes be bartered. What do I mean by that? Well, it's kind of an exchange. I'll exchange my love for something that I'm going to get in return. But what Jesus is teaching us today is what sacrificial love requires of us. Love isn't about what you get. It's about what you have to give. Jesus calls us to love like God loves. Jesus wants us to display divine love, not what our culture presents as love. Fulton Sheen, who was, I'm from originally the Diocese of Rochester, New York, and we went through several bishops while I was growing up. One, we had Fulton Sheen, and I was impressed when he used to be on television and he's up for beatification. He's at the venerable stage right now. And he had an interesting statement that I want to quote on sacrificial love. He says this: "Divine love is sacrificial love. Love does not mean to have and to own and to possess. It means to be had, to be owned, and to be possessed. It's not a circle circumscribed by self. It is arms outstretched to embrace all." Very interesting concept. Most of us, in our world especially, wants to see as having and owning and possessing. But he argues it's just the opposite. We should be had, be possessed, and be owned by others because of our imitation of God's sacrificial love. The widow's sacrificial gift, there's another point that I think needs to be made, and it's this. She was certainly reckless and with an abandoned attitude in her sacrificial love. She might have kept one coin. She could have kept one coin. It would have been something to help her meet her own need. But she gives everything. I don't know that I could do that if I were as desperate as she was. But she gives everything. And Jesus is underscoring that. So what's he teaching? What's he pointing out? The tragedy is that you and I tend to hold back giving everything to the other person in our lives. If it's our spouse, it's our children, our parents, whatever it is, the tragedy is we fail to make the final sacrifice, the final surrender. We talk in 12-step recovery about surrender. It's that kind of giving of oneself. Why would a widow, a poor widow, feel free to give away the money she needed for herself? She could do it because she learned to depend upon God. She trusted God, and she trusted in God's providential care and plan. You notice when Jesus sends out the 72 disciples, he tells them not to take anything. They don't need anything. Why? Because they can trust that he will provide. That widow had that trust. Jesus will sacrifice his life on the cross because of his sacrificial love for you and me. What sacrifice is he expecting from us this week?